Church members open their wallets religiously, but is the money being used wisely or is it being mismanaged? Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Tithes and Traitors.
Hi, welcome to another episode of the Big E, the Elephant in the Room. My name is Melissa, and my host is here with me.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jackie.
And today we will be talking about tithes and traders, also known as finances in the church. This has always been a earache in the churches, and we thought it would be a great episode to just bring it all to the table. So we have some great guests today. Our first guest is Xavier Green, and we also have a wonderful guest. She's behind the scenes all the time, but she was willing to come today and be part of this episode. Our producer, Tiffany.
Hi guys. Nice to be on this side of the camera.
So let's just jump right into it. We will be, like I said, discussing about finances in the church. So first off, we're just going to go and just talk about what really, in your perspective, what have you seen over the last couple of years or just over the years, your involvement in church, Xavier, when it comes to mismanagement or just various aspects of the finance that you have seen that have troubled you or just kind of brought to awareness or attention?
Okay. Hello, everyone. Just a brief introduction of myself. I'm Xavier. I've worked in church leadership in terms of volunteering church leadership in different aspects. I'm going to keep my denominational affiliation more discreet. I've worked not only in terms of a certain denomination, volunteer and leadership, but also I've been a member of Ministers Alliance where I've had relationships with ministers of different denominations, and we've always discussed finance, church leadership, and I've observed a lot of things in terms of allocation of tithes. My background, I have an MBA specialization in finance, also a master's of social work degree. I've counseled a lot of clients over the past 20 years, and a major component has been on finance. One of my research areas is what's called behavioral economics, and people wonder what in the world is that? And that's the application of psychology to how people make decisions in spending money, whether individual or investments. So I look at the mind, what's going on in a person's mind when they make decisions about money.
Sounds very interesting.
Yeah.
So with your experience with that, what have you seen that kind of brought to, like I said, awareness, to kind of just brought some, because a lot of, you go to board meetings, you go to different meetings that take place. What have you seen in leadership as well as even in the congregation that has brought attention that individuals just feel like there has become an issue or even developed even when it comes to where their money is really going?
Well, one of the things is transparency, and I'm glad you asked that question. Every church has different structures in terms of how money is spent, allocated. If you have a hierarchical structure, for example, the Methodist Church has a hierarchical structure. Money is funneled up to a governing body. And so there are different levels in terms of hierarchical structure. So 100% of your money that you give to the church does not automatically stays within the local congregation. You have other churches that's more congregational model where everything stays there. So they have more control of their allocations with where this money is going. Now, what I've seen a lot. We're going to tell you some stories. The one story I'll tell you, I was at a certain church, and I'm going to use this nebulously, in a certain state, New Jersey.
Yay, Jersey.
But I remember going to a certain church. This was probably 20 years ago, and they collect their offering. And they had a plate for the pastor, a plate for just general church fund, and a plate for church ministries. And I'm thinking, wow, he gets a salary and he's getting this. So, and the deacon would start off, it says, I'm going to start off with $100 in the pastor's plate. And I witnessed that every time I went to that church. All right. Now the pastor was a nice guy. I knew him. All right. Nice guy. But it made me think, wow, that's a lot of money going. You've already getting a salary from the church, and you're getting on top of this every service. Now, if you have 2 services, you can do the math. A congregation, probably around 500 to 1,000 people attending. And the deacon basically put in $100, and that's subliminal. When you put in that money, you're actually setting a benchmark with people. It is okay to give 100. So you're actually placing something with within a person's mind psychologically as to giving amount already. So that pastor is getting minimally a couple of $1,000s each service on top of what they're getting. So that started me to question that. One of the things that constantly I hear in churches, we don't have any money. We don't have any money. We don't have any money. So you may go and ask for a ministry, for funds for a certain ministry. We don't have any money. Then when you go to a meeting, you look at the financials and you're like, hold on, we do have money. All right. So I always say this, that people will have money in church. Churches operate just like on any organization. We'll have money for what we want monies to be directed to in terms of finance. And people have left the church because of angry that their money was not given to the ministries that they would like. Somebody said this to me years ago. I never forget it. And this was a retired executive. He said, and he wasn't talking about so much as a church as in terms of organizational structure. People will protest in 3 ways: with their time, with their feet, meaning that they'll move, go either to another church, another organization, and with their money. So meaning that they will either not give anything or give to somebody else or something else. And we assume those in leadership, they will do the best with our finance.
Mm-hmm.
And that may not always be the case. You've read in the news in terms of people in leadership who fall from grace and because of misappropriations of funds. You've seen that with individuals spending lavishly on cars, vacations, homes, all under the church auspices. I've known situations where individuals drove beautiful cars, very high-end luxury cars, but the cars were not in the individual's name, but in the church's name, which was perfectly legal. So the church actually owned the car, owned the home, and the individuals leased the cars and the homes from the church. Which is legal in terms of tax purposes. And I'm not a tax lawyer, so you'd have to talk to a tax lawyer about that, a trust lawyer about that. But you start to say, okay, if the church is paying all this to finance your lifestyle, how much is really staying in the church to provide for the ministries of the church?
Yeah, so Xavier, it's so funny you said that because we're dealing with we're in a situation right now with this pandemic. A lot of people are losing jobs. A lot of people are in a very hardship situation, and but the church in the forefront, they're still wanting their members to pay tithes, They still want their members to still contribute to the church and keep the church afloat. How can there be a balance in that? Because there are families that are home that are struggling, that can't even provide. And like, I'm going to jump into Tiffany, because Tiffany has a amazing story, what transpired with her financially. So Tiffany, if you can just tell us briefly your experience regarding the church and your experience financially and what took place with your family.
Yeah, sure. Happy to talk about that. So I can't necessarily speak from what happens on a board's perspective. I can only speak from what happened as being a member of a church for years, and then and not realizing up until when I really needed the church to be there for me, how much finances really went into your standing in the church. Right. So I grew up in the church. When I started going to the church as a young child, it was a small church, and then it grew. I'm not going to say the name of the church, but it grew to mega church status with thousands of members. But we were in the church since we knew the pastor personally and everything, because we were there when the church just had a few members, and then it, like I said, it grew. And through the years, we were pretty involved in the church. I was there on Sundays and Wednesdays for like the Bible studies and things like that. Even my parents and my grandmother, I know that they gave their tithes and their offerings. And I also I was a budding filmmaker even back from when I was a child. So we would volunteer our time. Me and my sisters would also do the video recordings for the church. We would be there from like, we had to be there before 7 a.m. to record the morning service, and then go and then after the morning service, then they had the 2 o'clock afternoon service, or I'm sorry, it was a 10 o'clock after, like the later morning service. So we would be there recording for the church, and so we did a lot, for the church. My other sisters who were budding actresses used to perform in the church plays and stuff. So we were very, really involved. And when I was around 10, my dad got sick. He was a very successful software engineer. He used to build software things for different companies down in Atlanta and stuff. So he did very well for himself, but then he got sick. He lost his kidneys, went on dialysis, and was sick for about 19 years. And during that time, of course, at first it was kind of okay, but then after a while, they started going to church less and less, and then medical bills started to pile up and things like that. And I didn't know too much about the finances, but I'm sure that that's one of the things they had to divert from, because it got really tough for us. My parents went from being very, very successful, having like multiple homes and stuff down there, to struggling. They had to divert the money that they had put aside for me and my sister to go to college just to pay the medical bills and stuff. And so I'm sure they weren't able to put as much into the offerings. And then with that said too, like, I didn't know of my family any necessarily when the offering plate came around. I don't know if they necessarily filled out the envelopes. They would just put money in, right? So fast forward to December of 2014, my dad passed away. Right before Christmas in 2014. By that time, I had gone away to move back to New York to go to school and start working and things like that. And so, very, very awful time. Although my dad was sick, but the time he passed away was a sudden passing. Like, he was sick, needed the kidney transplant. But when he passed away, it was more of like I won't say a heart attack, but it was like he passed away suddenly, right? So we weren't exactly expecting it at that moment. And it was right before Christmas. It was a very, very tough time. I never had to plan a funeral before. But I'm the oldest, and so it was kind of me and my mom and my cousin and stuff. And at the time, my grandmother was also sick, so there was just a lot going on at that moment. And if anybody's ever planned a funeral before, it's the worst possible thing you can do. I grew up and ended up becoming a film producer, and one of the things that I have to do as a film producer is I negotiate I have to like hire all these people. I have to negotiate for the camera costs and all of that stuff. But I didn't realize that planning a funeral was such a negotiation thing. Like you have to walk into this room and you see all these caskets and you have to decide everything costs money. Like I can go into a whole nother story about how they prey on people who are going to funerals. And with that said, it was a stressful time. The one place where I was not expecting for it to be stressful was the church, especially being that I'd been so involved in the church all throughout these years. Like, as I think back on it now, the fact that me and my sisters, who were preteens at the time, were doing the camera work for the church is like borderline child labor. They didn't even feed us in between the services. Like, if I have to hire camera guys now, I'm like, they were getting away with murder, but that's a whole, that's a whole nother story. Cause what I would have to pay to record for that many hours is ridiculous. But anyway, so, we had a meeting because we needed to plan a funeral, and the meetings were just not what I expected them to be. They were like, oh well, we don't know if we can make time for you. It's right before Christmas. We have to plan for our Christmas show and stuff. And it's like, well, I'm sorry, I don't want to have a funeral either, but this is just what we need to do. And then they're like, oh well, we don't see your parents as active member. They say, we see you, Tiffany, as an inactive member, but we don't see your parents as active members. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I've been coming here since I was like 8 years old. I didn't come here alone, how. And so I asked them, I was like, how does one actually become an inactive member? And they're like, well, when we go through the financials, and that's when it clicked that you become an active or inactive member based off of your financials. And
now your participation, all that work you were doing,
all that
it's all about that money.
It's all about the money. And it became, because we were inactive members, we weren't priority for having a funeral.
That's a shame.
That's a shame.
And they were just giving us the runaround. They wouldn't even give us space for about 2 weeks after my dad passed, so my dad his body had to sit in the funeral home for at least 2 weeks. The only way, and then also the church has become so big that I was just dealing with the funeral ministry, right? I couldn't even talk directly to the pastor. The only way we were able to finally get the funeral secured was we had to make a couple of phone calls and get onto the pastor. And then she was like, oh, the Jackmans, of course. Like, what? Yes, get them in. And then we were able to actually get the funeral. But then even with that, I was like, okay, so can we have the funeral now? Can we have the repast? They wouldn't give us the space to do the repast. They're like, oh, well, we had to move the rehearsals for the church for the Christmas play over into the lunchroom, so you can't use that for the repast. Like, begrudgingly, they gave us the funeral and then wouldn't give us the space for the repast. So I had to go back to my old high school, and they let us use their lunchroom to do our repast. And then the other thing too, as a filmmaker, and I didn't necessarily have the strength to actually get up there and speak at my dad's funeral. And so what I wanted to do was I put together this nice video with like pictures and videos of me and my sisters and my dad and, family and stuff like that. And some of us spoke in the video, and I wanted to play that video during the service. And that was also a problem. They were like, well, now if we need people from the media ministry to be at the service, we got to pay them too. So we don't know if we can do that. And I was just like, my gosh, this is the one way I can honor my dad. Mm-hmm. I make videos, I make movies. This is the way I can honor my dad. And that was a problem. I at that point, I told them, I was like, I know how to work the equipment. I used to be on the media industry. Let me do it. Mm-hmm. And then they eventually let someone do it. But it just was, I just was not expecting to have to go through all of that with the church. Mm-hmm. And I told my mother at that point, I said, after this funeral is over, after I have to come here and bury my dad, I will never go to church again. And I've kept that. And it hurts. I know it hurts my mom because she tells me all the time, well, you grew up in the church, that's not how we raised you. I was like, well, that's not the church I was expecting.
Mm.
And since my dad passed, well, I had to go back to the same church 6 months later when my grandmother passed.
Mhm.
And, and that was also another problem. We've nicknamed the guy who ran the church ministry Reverend Incompetent. That's what we started calling him. We're like, he shouldn't even be over the parking lot ministry, but because he just did not have the empathy that I think you need to have when someone is grieving. And I think how the whole structure of it in general just needs to be redone. So I've stopped going to church. I will show up sometimes, but only only for like a special event. Like sometimes my little cousins will be in a church play and I'll go for that. Or the last time I went was when the church gave out certificates for all the graduates, but that was only on Zoom. That was a couple months ago. But just go as a member, I have no interest in going to church anymore, which is a shame because like I said, I grew up in the church, but they really let me down in at the worst time in my life. They let me down.
And Tiffany, and I'm so sorry that that happened to you and your family, and especially a very vulnerable moment when you want people to be surrounding you, and and for a church to just act and perform in that manner. It's just it just baffles me personally to just wonder. And now this allows me to really even understand why maybe so many people are not attending church. And it could be, because of situations like your story, or other mishaps financially, that have happened to them. And it's very troublesome. And that's why I said, right now we're in this pandemic. We have this situation. We have these situations like yourself that people are financially going through something and they need the church. But the church is putting their hands out to saying, well, we need the money. If you can't give it to us, or you're not on that list, or you haven't paid your tithes in so many months or within a year, well, we can't do anything for you. So it just, like I said, it does bother me. It troubles me with that. And Xavier, listening to her story, how would you think going forward, especially being in various positions that you held in the church, what would you have done differently?
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, because and even describing what you went through, it was heart-wrenching. And I think the word that would best describe, you were hurt.
Yeah.
Terribly hurt. Because you didn't expect that.
Yeah.
When I was doing my undergrad studies in ministerial theology, I remember one of my mentors said to me, Xavier, always remember this: never put paper over people. And that was almost 30 years ago, and I still remember that. Now, there are two things. I'm going to try to balance it on the church, and I'm trying to balance it from the human perspective. It seems the church, it's a large church, and they have a policy in place where a test of membership is given. And if you're not given, then it excludes you from receiving certain services. Or if not, you're not on the priority list for receiving those services. I always, one of the things in finance you learn, you have data, but there's always a story behind the data. There's always something behind the data. But in the church, it shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter if you are a member or not a member. It shouldn't matter if you have $1 million or you have 1 penny. All right. This is a service in terms of ministry. And that's where the people aspect comes in. The church is not, the church technically, all right, runs in terms of legal status and whatnot. It functions like a corporation, but we don't function like a corporation. We're not out for profit. And if you cannot, it's not like if I go to the store, if I don't have the money for an iPad, Best Buy won't give me the iPad. It does not matter. With your situation with your dad, one, with the camera crew, that's, you shouldn't have been privy to that discussion. If you needed media there, that's fine. As a church, we absorb that. We absorb that as part of our ministry to people, or whether they're members or not members. Two of the most grueling things is when you have impending death and death. Death is probably the most heart-wrenching things for a family. It throws a family off kilter. You don't know what to do. You're grieving the loss of your loved one. You're trying to put a funeral together while still trying to grieve and trying to hold yourself and your family together. And now you're trying to figure out, okay, how do I navigate the church? Who do I contact? And also pastoral care. There should be someone to kind of help me in terms of the grieving process, and like trying to get through just to get to the pastor. It shouldn't be that way. As a minister, one of the most important things to remember, is grievance, funerals. Rudy Giuliani in his book, and I know I'm not being political when I say Rudy Giuliani, let me qualify that. But he had, after 911, which I commend, he was exemplary in terms of his response to 911, and he wrote a book called Leadership. The best chapter in that book for me was when he talked about funerals, the importance as a leader being there for the family during funerals, making sure that the family's taken care of, the expenses with surrounding anything that the entity, in that case, the city of New York, needed to do to make sure the family of those first responders are taken care of and the funeral went smoothly. In the church is the same thing. When you have death, as a church, we have to rally around that family. We have to be there. You shouldn't be privy to discussion. If you need something with media, don't worry, we'll take care of it. So what if it costs $100, $200 for their time? We have thousands of dollars in our church. We're not hurting, all right? If the family need a particular time for meeting that, for having that funeral, if it conflicts with a major program, then you should assist that family. Let's try another venue. Let's see how we can make it work. If there's a practice going on in the hall, let's see if we can move the practice. You can move the practice. It's not holy writ that it must be in that particular place, because ultimately the cares of the person, that family, is more important than the operational aspect, the policy aspect with that church entity. And so what happens when you violate or you're not sensitive, let me use a better word, if you're not sensitive to the needs of the grieving, the needs of those who are hurting, you become bitter. You become bitter not only at the church, you become bitter at what the gospel represents, all right? And it clouds you from going to another church, even when that church intention may be genuine. And it just, because you have that bitter experience. Most of the people who I've met in my lifetime, when they've severed their relationship with a particular church, and not necessarily mean that they've severed their relationship with Jesus Christ. Okay, I want to make that distinction clear, and I'm sure some people might hold on, but I've met people who are Christians who are hurt by things that happen in the church, and most of the people who have left church, it's not because of the doctrinal, it's because of something relationship wise that happened with the church. In your sense, Tiffany, you and your family gave to the church. You had a relationship, you thought, with the church. And now the time of your most need, the test of the relationship is how much money you've given to the church. That's how they've made their relationship. It's like a marriage, okay? my test of my marriage relationship with my wife is how much salary she's bringing in.
And see, what
She's
makes
not
it
bringing
so bad,
in,
Mr.
I
Xavier,
can't do it.
I mean, what makes it so bad about Miss Tiffany's situation, and thank you so much for sharing that hurtful, harmful situation with the audience. What makes it so bad is people are not asking for free things, but free cassette, free food, free rent. People are not asking to do you a favor all the time. We're just looking for compassion. And I think the church has misrepresented their title as this is a hospital for healing. Come and you'll be good to go. And I think a lot of times there are many people who are absent. Thank you, Melissa, for bringing that out from church, because they have had hurtful situations, and the church, so it seems, hasn't recognized and acknowledged their behavior, its behavior towards the people that make up the church. People make up the church. You have to treat people a certain kind of way.
Yeah.
I have several friends here in Georgia, similar situations, not as painful as Tiffany's, but it was painful for them because they were deacons in the church, very active, same thing. It's kind of like, well, isn't this like a barter system? If you give service, shouldn't you get some type of support from the church? But I guess it's not. So in these two individual situations, they attended separate churches, of course, different denominations and everything. They needed a financial help with their utilities because they both fell in hard times in different situations. Everybody, this is pre-pandemic. So, I can only imagine what the pandemic has done to a lot of members. But needless to say, they went to the church to ask for some help and they were denied, although they have given many years of service as a deacon. And the other person was an usher. So just like Tiffany's situation with her father's situation with the funeral, they don't attend church any longer. They'll have nothing to do with it. No, like Xavier said, it has nothing to do with their relationship with God. But it has everything to do with their relationship with attending church every week.
Exactly. And I will say what Xavier said is true. I still consider myself a Christian, I just don't want to go to church, because and even when those few times that I have gone to church, because like I said, it was a special event or something, I am triggered as soon as they start talking about money, as soon as they start saying, oh, it's time for offering. And even the last time I went to church, they gave the pastor a special gift, a gift box of money. And I was just like, I'm just reminded, that's why you don't do this.
You have rumors, and you hear people that do work on boards at church. I'm no member of a church in particular, and I don't serve on a board, but you do hear people mismanaging money all the time. It's like, okay, well, so what's being done about it? People who are really in need, like yourself, Tiffany, and others who will really come and help. What happens to them when they get rejected? Everybody else has got their hand in the plate.
And the stuff that I was asking
what's
for,
being done about that? Is that a crime?
Yeah, the things that we were asking for, I wasn't even like, now that you mention it, Jackie, we probably, as my dad got sicker and stuff, we probably could have used the help of, maybe they could have helped us with the bill, but we actually never reached out to the church for any of that stuff. Never reached out for help with any bills, anything like that. The only thing we reached out to them for was help with them doing what they do or what they're supposed to do, which is like help supply a funeral, help provide that space. And I had no idea that your tithes and offerings were basically like a life insurance policy where you can cash it in when you need it. It's clear. Now I understand that we obviously fell off on our life insurance payments to the church.
I mean,
who knew? Who knew?
One thing, if I can add to it, Tiffany, it's just in terms of bringing it kind of more of a broader perspective. Not all churches would have reacted like the church you mentioned. I've known a number of churches who have exemplary ministries when it comes to meeting the needs of those who are in need, and particularly during a time of death. So, but always begin, it starts with leadership with talking about what is our mission as a church? What are we here for?
I think this topic will always be discussed. I think it's always going to have some underlining. I think we're always going to have so much to say when it comes to finances in the church. It's going to always be a topic because you're going to always have people that are going to be dealing with financial issues, hardships. But the bottom line, the church is supposed to be there to assist, help, be the
Yes.
for everyone. And like I said, we're here to discuss. We're here to set the record straight and just bring awareness on this platform and on and we just want everyone to know that is listening to this. This is not to discredit. This is not to tear down the church, but we're trying to bring awareness to open everyone's eyes to be able to see that churches need to be a little bit more transparent and be more supportive and maybe even understanding due to people's circumstances or their situation. And no, it goes a long way. And we're, like I said, we're here at the Big E, the elephant in the room. This is what we're all about. So again, we want to just thank everyone for tuning in to the Big E, the elephant in the room. Thank you for the wonderful guests. Thank you, Xavier. Thank you, Tiffany, for telling your stories and just truly being transparent today. And again, thank you again for watching the Big E, the elephant in the room, where we speak about the unspeakable.